Today, let's say that you're a complete beginner in French. Maybe you remember a word, maybe two, maybe a bonjour from your high school lessons, but not very much. And this year, or maybe next, if you're watching this next year, it's decided you want to learn French. You have your own reasons. Maybe it's for a trip that you want to take to France on the next holidays. Maybe you want to reconnect with a side of your family living in France. Or maybe you just want to impress your spouse, or it's just for the fun of learning the language. The question is, where do you start? French is a difficult language. Lots of people talk about the French pronunciation as being very difficult, fast spoken French as being something incomprehensible, grammar being very difficult, local accents, conjugation. So my language has a reputation for being something very difficult. Well, we'll see later how it goes. But the issue with learning a language, and this applies to all of them, is that you have too many choices as a beginner. The whole process, on top of being a bit overwhelming because French seems difficult, you have so many resources that you don't know where to start. For example, should you pick a city on Amazon? Should you start with Duolingo, Rosetta Stone, a children's book, listening to French podcasts? Well, the issue is that some resources are outdated, some resources are completely wrong, and it's very hard to find a reliable, modern, fun way that suits you, your needs, and your busy schedule. So today, the goal of this lesson is to help you have a plan to learn French from scratch with confidence. As usual, you can download the full lesson on communefrancaise.com. The interest of getting the lesson on Comme une Française this week is that you will have all the links to the resources to learn French as a beginner mentioned in this video. This is very useful if you're watching this on YouTube because I cannot put all the links there. Getting the lesson is free. You just have to leave your first name and email to get the PDF of the lesson right away, so you can download it, keep it for later, maybe print it and take notes. I'm Géraldine, bienvenue sur Comme une Française. Allez, c'est parti! My first question all the time to all my students is, why do you want to learn French? Too many don't know why they want to learn French, but knowing is key to get on the right path and to learn the right thing. For example, some students would say, I love French, it's my favorite language, it's a beautiful language, I've always wanted to learn, it's been on my bucket list for years. So these students, what do they want? They want to feel the pride and excitement of embracing a new hobby, for example. This is what I call learning French language skills only. That's absolutely fine, it's a kind of goal. Another student, maybe you, will say, I'm going to France soon to visit, live or study, and I want to be comfortable and speak with the locals. So what do you want to feel in this case? You want to feel like you can get along when you visit France because you have the confidence and the knowledge to speak French a little. This is what I call learning practical French. The third case I hear a lot about is I want to connect with my French friends, or maybe my in-laws, my family, maybe my French husband or wife. This way, you want to feel like you can exchange more than just polite smiles with your French in-laws or nephews, or maybe integrate and make French friends in France instead of just staying with expats only. So this is what I call family and friends French. It's different from the ones that I mentioned before. And the fourth goal is more connected to culture. So for example, the students might say, I want to connect with my heritage. For example, my grandmother is from Normandy and I've always wanted to learn French. I want to feel exposed to new and exciting things, new people, new ideas, and a great appreciation for French culture that runs in my blood. So you see, this is more about understanding what's going on, the culture, the history, and this is what I call cultural French. So now I show you the 4 cases of kind of the goals that you might have to learn French and what you want to feel, which is extremely important. So please pause the lesson, whether you're watching this on YouTube, on Comme une Française, maybe you're in the metro, not in the car, I hope, at home having breakfast, and think, why do you want to learn French? Which of these cases apply to you? Take the closest one so I can show you what to do next to learn French as a beginner. Did you find it? It would be wonderful to let me know in the comments what suits you best, so I can help you and we can share ideas. Before I give you the keys of what to do to learn French as a beginner, according to your goal, I wanted to go through 3 common difficulties for beginners in French. The things that all of you will step on and have difficulties with, and to show you that you can get beyond that, okay? These are the 3 areas where French is difficult for English-speaking learners. If you are from a Spanish-speaking country, it will be easier, and other things will be more difficult, okay? And this applies to all the goals. I want to go through this together so you don't make the biggest mistake of all, which is to stop in front of very common difficulties that you can go through easily if you have someone showing you how. The first difficulty is French pronunciation. You have to know that some sounds are hard. For example, en and un, the French R, these are very, very famous ones that are difficult, and some sounds might be impossible to hear or say. That's fine, do not freak out. These kind of sounds might take you 20 years or maybe you will never get them. It's U and E, for example. For some people, it will be the en and the un that I mentioned before, but it will depend on where you're from and who taught you, etc. But again, it's a common difficulty, you're not the first one, and you should not give up because of that. For example, as you might know, my mom is Mexican, I'm Mexican as well, on top of French. And it's funny because after 36 years in France, there's some sounds that my mom still can't say. She's perfectly bilingual, that's fine, but there are sounds that are difficult for her. And what she does is she just rephrases the phrases that are difficult for her. For example, at Christmas time, we were at the market buying onions. And she couldn't say deux oignons doux, which means it's a kind of onion that, I think it's the yellow one. And she couldn't say it, so she rephrased it to avoid having to repeat herself 10 times. She just showed it first and then that she wanted to. But these particular sounds, e, wa, e, on, and ou, are difficult to make different for her in such a small sentence. So it's fine, you can get around it and you can be bilingual even if your pronunciation is not absolutely perfect. So please relax, especially as a beginner, it's going to be okay. You will sound and feel a little bit ridiculous when you're practicing in front of your bathroom mirror, but actually when you're speaking French with the context, real life, and real expectations as a beginner, you will be mostly understood and it will be perfectly fine. So don't freak out because of French pronunciation. However, I'm going to give you 2 main tips. My shortcuts for beginners. You can avoid 99% of the pronunciation mistakes that clueless tourists do by learning the silent letters in the new words that you learn. This puts you on the right path from the start, and it will save you lots of times trying to correct yourself later and sounding weird. I have to say, as a teacher, I've been teaching for over 6 years now. Wow. I'm a bit anxious and tired of students saying bon appétit when they have a C1 level. Beginners are fine, you all make mistakes, but it means that your real understanding of pronunciation is not the same as where you should be, especially at a C1 and C2 level, which are very, very advanced. So, for example, bon appétit, you don't say the T at the end. So, for example, as a beginner, what you can do is when you're learning new words in a textbook or just writing them down, just cross with a pencil the letters that we don't say. And this way you learn the word right from the start. So remember, my shortcut for beginner is to avoid saying the silent letters from the start. And this you can learn from any book, and you can just cross the letter with a pencil. Now, my tip for perfectionists. If you're very, very much into learning French very well from the start, Be aware of the differences between written and modern spoken French, even as a beginner. This will save you a big headache later when you hear French in real life and you want to actually speak with real people. Spoken French is a bit like music. It has to sound right. So sometimes we change it a little bit to make it sound much more smooth and fluid. For example, we make la liaison. It's a very French thing where you merge some words into each other so they sound better. We also eat some letters and we cut some words. Knowing that will help you avoid sounding like a rigid textbook or an old-fashioned French. For example, in English, it would be like me sounding like Hamlet in Shakespeare. It's nice, but it's not how French people actually speak. So if you're a perfectionist and very much into learning French properly, just be aware of that very quickly from the start, and it will get you on the right path. The second big mistake is to focus too much on the gender of nouns. In French, nouns have a gender. They're either feminine or masculine. We don't have any neutral like I think German has. And most of the time, the rest of the phrase has to agree with the gender of the noun. So we have the adjective, we have the article, and we have the verb. I know it's scary, but it doesn't have to be, because students should not focus too much on the gender of nouns at the start, especially because no French person cares if you make these kind of mistakes. I told you about my mom trying to avoid certain sounds in French. Well, my friend Christina, who's been in France for 15 years, we made a video together, by the way. You should check it out if you want to know how to become more fluent in French. She's bilingual too, but she gave up on the gender of nouns because that's way too difficult for her. Her French is fantastic, but when she's speaking, she just gave up on certain nouns because it's just too much to think about. However, what she does is that when she's writing emails in French, she always checks the gender there because she knows that she has time to actually fix her French, but not in conversation. So even her, after 15 years working for big companies in France and being a fantastic French speaker, she just gave up. So don't think too much about that. My shortcut for beginners here is to learn only the gender of nouns that you will need. Don't worry too much about learning lists of vocabulary you will use only once a year. And please relax. Again, think about Christina. She just gave up on them after some time. Again, French people know it's hard because we had to learn them as well. And some French people will even think that your mistakes are sexy. You will remind them of the English singer Jane Birkin, who makes tons of mistakes, especially on gender, and lots of people think it's cute. My tip for perfectionists is to go beyond that. So, if I say don't care about the gender of nouns in spoken French because it shouldn't get in the way of you speaking, always check the gender of nouns when you're actually writing in French. Do what my friend Christina does. Well, she's an English teacher, so she knows how to learn languages, so do what she does. What she does is always use an autocorrect on your computer or check the gender of nouns. This will help you always think about what you're writing and always question yourself, am I writing this properly? And also it will help you with your grammar and conjugation later. But even for now, that's a good start. Focus on the nouns when you're writing something and use a dictionary, maybe a website such as wordreference.com, or any way you can to check the gender of nouns when you're writing things. Again, if you're a perfectionist, try to be ruthless in your writing when you're using a computer because you have all the tools you need, and at least checking the gender of nouns will make you think about your French and progress much faster. The third issue that students have when they're learning French, even as beginners, is the French grammar, the conjugation, and all the exceptions we have in French. I have to tell you that unfortunately, learning French is endless. Even after 50 years of learning, you will never, ever, ever speak French perfectly. And that's fine. It's okay. So don't assume you will learn all the grammar and conjugation at an A1 level before moving to A2. People don't even know everything at a C2 level, which is almost bilingual. And even French people don't. So don't freak out. It's okay to not know everything, and it's okay to make mistakes. So as a beginner, only focus on doubling down on learning your foundations right. I know it sounds like I'm a classic teacher, but I am a classic teacher. I love teachers, they're awesome, but you have to get your foundations right so you can build on what you're learning then. For grammar and conjugation, don't go like, I'm going to self-teach myself French, because it's going to get much, much more difficult than you think, and you will focus on the wrong elements. If you want to have a few tips of what to focus on, for beginners in terms of verbs and conjugation, focus on the first group verbs, that's all the verbs ending in ER, plus être, which is to be, avoir, to have, aller, which is to go, and vouloir, which is to want. That's good enough for now as a beginner. For conjugation, just focus on the present and focus on the shortcuts for conjugation. So, for example, aller plus infinitif, aller, the verbs to go, plus infinitive, instead of learning the future. This is how French people speak. We don't use some tenses, so don't learn them. I see so many students trying to learn French on their own and learning things that are absolutely of no use whatsoever in French. My shortcuts for beginners in terms of grammar is extremely simple. Make short sentences. I say that all the time when I correct my students' homework in my live program, Le Salon de Géraldine, which is way too advanced for you right now. Make short sentences. I know it sounds obvious and a bit duh, but by making short, structured sentences, you make less mistakes and you will become more confident in your French. Mistakes don't matter, but clarity does. So remember, make short sentences whether you're speaking or writing, and this way your grammar will get good, I'd say, 90% of the time if you stick to what you know. And you will know much more than what you think you can actually learn if you take the right path. So trust me, this will make your French much better and much clearer. Now my tip if you're a perfectionist of French. Grammar and conjugation are the biggest traps for perfectionists. Stay on the path, and if you want to focus on something, focus on spoken French grammar instead. For example, learn very fast how we drop the ne in negation, how we replace the nous with on in modern spoken French. Learn all the conjugation shortcuts I mentioned before instead of learning useless tenses. You will sound French very, very quickly this way, and you won't get lost and have this analysis paralysis. What should I say? What tense should I use? Because this is what perfectionists do. And I've seen lots of students getting lost this way. Students with a fantastic mind and motivation got lost along the way because they were focusing on too many things at the same time. There's one last thing I wanted to mention. I talked about 3 mistakes. Is that a big mistake for students? I've seen that a lot in French, but it applies to all the languages, is waiting to speak perfectly before starting to speak. This applies to all languages. I assume students of German, of English, obviously, of Hindi, of Japanese, Spanish, everything. They want to speak perfectly before they actually use their language. And recently I was talking to students at a B2 level, confessing that she was too shy to speak French. And this shouldn't happen. I know it's easy to say, but it's a common perfectionist trap. I've seen that before. You won't be the only one. It's fine. And sometimes you just need a big hug and some reassurance. I can do that. You can do that as well. Don't wait. Do not wait to have a perfect French to use it. Again, if you make short sentences, to stick to the path, use the vocabulary you know, don't focus too much on the gender of words, you can very, very, very easily start using your French. You absolutely don't need something complicated. You can do it. I absolutely trust you. Now, let's talk about the big subject of today, how to learn French according to your goal. So, before I share these resources, I want to just precise that none of the resources I mentioned are affiliates. I'm not earning any money by sharing them, and none of the creators are paying me to say that. I recommend these resources in real life to friends of friends who want to learn French. I've been recommending them for years, and now that I'm actually finally doing something for beginners, this is what I want to share with you. The methods and resources I chose for today's lesson are available online or all around the world. This was a very big criteria for me. They have to be available to you right now. If I don't mention a resource, it's not because I hate it or don't like it. No, it's just because I had to pick a few. So please share your experience in the comments if you loved a resource or a method that I didn't share today and that you actually enjoyed in French, even if you're just above the beginner level. For people who want to learn French language skills only, without really any culture, that just want to do it for the fun, there are two options. The first one we mentioned is French language skills only. So here we have two options, and both are fine. There's no judgment there. The first option is you're not very serious about learning French, it's just for fun, or just as a complete beginner to see how French is, what you could do, and learning a few words. Obviously, the first resource I could mention is Duolingo, because it's free and very accessible. It's popular and you play it like a game. Honestly, I very rarely recommend Duolingo, because it provides no cultural context, it teaches you a lot of useless vocabulary, and the forums about the French language are often wrong. But it's a very good start. And their repetition system is great, and I know lots of students who started with this app, so I'm not going to throw any stone at this method of learning the language. My partner started learning Spanish with Duolingo to meet my Mexican family, and it was a good fit because for a 2-week trip it was fine, and I was there to provide cultural context and tell you what matters and what did not. So he started there. It's not perfect, but if it's just for the fun of it and you're not very serious or into learning French, just go for Duolingo. It's absolutely fine. If you're serious about learning French, there are two options again. You have the live element, and this way I would say go to your local Alliance Française or any other good French class with a teacher. If you can join a real life class to get the foundations of your French right, go on. It's not because I teach online that I say classes should close. No, obviously not. If you're lucky enough to be able to go, that's a fantastic option. What's tricky with live classes sometimes is that you need someone reliable to tell you if the French taught is good or not. So that can be tricky, but most of them are fantastic options for you. The pros of a live class is that you have a live teacher to take care of you, so that's fantastic. But the con is that classes can be over your budget or not available in your city or your busy schedule. So that very much depends on where you live and what you're actually doing right now. If you want an online option and you want to learn French properly from the start, I have my own course, which is called French for Beginners by Géraldine. It's my first online program for beginners. I've been helping intermediate and advanced students for over 6 years, but I've had so many requests that I had to do it. We're opening it next week. At the moment, we're in January 2019, so maybe you're watching this in the future. You can already pre-register to be notified when we open, and this course will help you master all the basics of French to have a solid foundation for your French for now and for the future. So what's good with that, you have unlimited access to the course and lifetime access to all the lessons, so you can take it every year, you can take it several times, you can take it once a week, once a month, it's really up to you. However, contrary to the Alliance Française classes, you don't have a teacher to correct you. Your pronunciation mostly, because there will be quizzes. But that's the difference with what you can have live. You just have to pick what suits your budget and your schedule. Now let's move on to practical French. If you want purely tourist French, or you're just going to France for a short professional stay, My favorite resource, which I've been recommending for years, is an app and a service called Earworms. My pronunciation of it is not really good, so just read it below. Earworms. You can try it using the link that I put below the video. It's a very efficient and organized phrasebook. Earworms doesn't cover any culture, but the French is 99% right and the phrases are perfectly suited for a visit to France. I recommend you purchase the app if you're interested, so you get the audio and the text at once, which is not always the case for other options such as the audiobook. So again, for a short stay in France, Earworms is fantastic for you and it's very cheap. The second case is if you want to interact with the locals. So for example, the short professional stay with chit-chat at a coffee machine, which is a challenge. You use Earworms and you add italki. I put the link on the blog below the video. italki is a platform where you can find teachers and practice partners to learn a language with. It's online and it's one-to-one. So the strategy I always recommend students to do is that they get Earworms, they learn the phrases from there, and they practice their French with italki afterwards. So they can actually use their French in context and get someone talking back to them. And that's a good way to actually have some chit-chat. Also, your pronunciation will be corrected by a teacher, and you can add a little bit of real-life customs and culture to your French, and that makes everything better when you want to interact with French people in France. My tip for italki, and this is what students told me because lots of my students use it, is to pick a Francophone native teacher. If you happen to be visiting a Francophone country that is not France, a good thing is to pick a teacher from this country so they can teach you some slang, some regionalisms, and a few customs from the country you're going to visit. That makes your French even more authentic and fun. Now let's get into the French culture a little bit more. We're going to talk about the family and friends French. So this is about connecting with your French friends, maybe your in-laws, your extended families, or maybe your French husband or wife. And you want to exchange more than English or just polite smiles because you don't speak any French. Here my tip is very simple. You pick any of the above, the thing that we mentioned before, and you add a big element of French customs and culture. I highly recommend you do not rely only on your French 101 to connect with French people because we have society rules, etc., and ways to make friendships. And you will do much, much, much better by adding like some subtleties of French culture to this French, even if it's basic. My recommendations for that, you just pick what suits your learning style. For example, books. 2 books I recommend. Pamela Druckermann's book, Bringing Up Bébé. It's fantastic. It's not only about education for children, no. It's a lot about social life in France. Fantastic inputs and great analysis, so I highly recommend it. I did a full lesson on that. You can find the link on the blog. And also a book by David Lebovitz called The Sweet Life in Paris. Again, great analysis of what's going on in France in terms of subtleties and culture. And you will find my interview of David Lebovitz on the blog below the video as well. Obviously, if you're more into video lessons, you can just mix and match the Commune Française's free lessons on culture, customs, and big embarrassing mistakes. This way you will be able to avoid these embarrassing mistakes and you will make friends much, much more easily. Obviously, once you know a bit more of French, you can get on my more advanced programs because we mix culture, subtleties, and language spoken French. So you can actually make friends very easily because I analyze how French people make friends and how you can actually do the same. But that's for when you will be ready. It's not for now. At the moment, you have the books and you have all my free lessons about this particular subject. The last option is Cultural French, which is connecting with your heritage. So for that, pick any of the above for learning basic French, and then add French-related resources with English subtitles. For Cultural French, I always tell students, don't pressure yourself into reaching a C2 level, like a bilingual level. Just follow your passion. That's absolutely fine. I always recommend to get the basics of French 101, but focus on written comprehension and a bit of oral comprehension rather than speaking and writing too much, because you will use your French as a way to understand French resources on your French heritage. You can also explore French customs and French subtleties as well in order to understand your family's choice and life. So here are some French resources that you will enjoy about French culture, history and customs. The first one is Échappée Belle. It's a fantastic program about travel, and they have several episodes about regions of France and Francophone countries. Des Racines et des Ailes is more like big documentaries about history and fantastic places in France, like castles or big houses or wines. Then we have C'est pas sorcier. C'est pas sorcier talks about everything for children. I highly recommend you focus on any episode on history or certain countries. You also have many other documentaries on France.tv, which is the replay site for all the French national TV programs. For example, you can focus on art, cuisine, history, travels, etc. And at last, Arte as well has fantastic programs on France. So the goal for you here, if you're focusing on French culture, is just to know enough French to grasp enough of what's being said and understand the French subtleties to enrich your knowledge of French culture beyond just the cliché that you can find in some resources. I hope you found this path. Let me know in the comments what you will do to learn French. My program French for Beginners by Géraldine will open next week, so if you want to receive all the details, I will leave a link below this video on Commune Française, and you will see if it's a good fit for you. There's no pressure. If you like this video, or if you want to share these ideas with your Francophile friends, please do it. That's the best way to support my free work. You can put a thumb up on YouTube, you can subscribe to the channel if you want. You can also share on Facebook, on Twitter, by email, just telling your friends. I know that lots of people want to learn French and they struggle because there's so many options. Again, here we saw different methods according to what you want. Some are free, some are cheap, some are more expensive, but at least if you follow the path, you will make wonders and you will speak French in no time. So if you want more French, more spoken French, you can get my free 10-day everyday French crash course to double your French in just 10 days. It's a free course. Even if you're a beginner, there are cultural elements, there are customs elements, and you can learn a few expressions here and there, and it's lots of fun. It's completely free. You just have to subscribe on communefrancaise.com by leaving your first name and email, and you will get lesson 1 right away. I wish you une bonne journée, which is a good day, une bonne après-midi, a good afternoon, or maybe une bonne nuit, a good night, if it's already night. And I will see you next time. Allez, salut!